right, welcome back, guys, to Mealtime News. It's episode 8. I'm your host, Henry. Let's get into it. All right, so I wanted to start by following up on this Mitch McConnell story that we talked about a little bit yesterday. So he released this letter from his doctor saying that he was medically cleared to work again. For those of you that didn't see the video yesterday, where he froze up in front of a bunch of reporters after one of them asked him a question.
Oh, that's good.
So his doctor in this letter came out and said, quote, "Occasional lightheadedness is not uncommon in concussion recovery and can also be expected as a result of dehydration." I'm sure some of this is attributable to a concussion that he got last fall, but also the dude's 81 and at a certain age, it just gets harder, especially when you're also dealing with stuff like injury. So obviously we wish him the best of health, but who knows what this means for the rest of his political career. But Republicans do have to consider what's next for Mitch McConnell, because he has 4 years left in his term, which will end in 2027. And at that point, he'll be 84 or 85 years old, which is insane for elected office. All right, next story. So we now know that Joe Biden was using pseudonyms while he was vice president. Okay, so the funniest part about this is that the pseudonyms were just really bad as far as concealing the true identity of Joe Biden. The 3 that he used were Robin Ware, Robert L. Peters, and J.R.B. Ware. So let's just go through a few of them. J.R.B. Ware, J.R.B. Joseph R. Biden, Ware, Delaware, the state where he was a senator for almost 4 decades and he'd lived his whole life. Robin Ware. Robin is basically his middle name. By the way, Joe Biden's middle name, Robinette. Didn't believe it at first, but a Google search confirmed that his middle name is Robinette. And obviously the Ware, also from Delaware. So second very reasonable question is, why would he use pseudonyms while he was vice president? Well, I think it's because of the Freedom of Information Act. And that's a law that allows people like reporters or other members of the public to file a request for some of the emails or communications that he had while he was in the office of the vice president. So what were in these emails might be another reasonable question to ask. Well, apparently the notable one was there was this email where he was confirming a phone call with the Ukrainian president at the time, and he had CC'd Hunter Biden on the email. So this is another trickle of information in line with the theory that Hunter Biden was using his dad as a way to get this prosecutor in Ukraine fired, and that prosecutor was looking into the head of Burisma, and Hunter Biden at that time was on the board of Burisma and getting paid by Burisma. So Democrats respond to this saying there's still no hard evidence that links Biden to Hunter Biden's business deals, and no evidence that he got money from Hunter Biden, and they say he was just trying to help his son who had addiction issues. Republicans, on the other hand, respond to that saying, well, 1, there's a wealth of evidence that implicates Biden in some of his son's corruption, and 2, that the worst way to help a son that has addiction issues is to give him a lot more money with which he can fund his addiction. And so it was more about Biden getting money for himself. Okay, next story. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been under fire recently for financial gifts that he has received from a billionaire named Harlan Crow. Should we care? Well, it's debatable. So here are the arguments that we shouldn't care. 1 is that Harlan Crow hasn't had any cases in front of the Supreme Court, and so there was no conflict of interest between Justice Thomas and any of Harlan Crow's businesses. And 2, that Joe Biden, like last week, was staying at this property at Lake Tahoe of this super rich Democratic billionaire. And so to the extent that there is any corruption, that it cuts both ways. So here's the arguments that we should care. Justices are supposed to be impartially adjudicating these cases, and if they're getting money from rich people that may influence how they think, that doesn't help in that aim. And even if Harlan Crow didn't have any cases in front of Justice Thomas, he may have had friends who had cases in front of Justice Thomas or who will have cases in front of Justice Thomas, and this makes it a conflict of interest. All right, next story. A leader of the Proud Boys was just sentenced to 17 years in prison. So the Proud Boys are this right-wing kind of almost militia group. A lot of people have compared them to the Antifa of the right, and a quote-unquote top lieutenant, and I don't know how much actual structure groups like these have, but a top lieutenant of the Proud Boys was just sentenced to 17 years in prison for activities relating to January 6th. This guy's name was Joseph Biggs, and they say that he controlled a group of the Proud Boys who were the most violent when January 6th happened. I want to use this as a chance to kind of give both sides arguments about January 6th so people can better understand how others think about it. Democrats, and I think a small number of Republicans too, say that it was an insurrection on the Capitol and that it was a threat to the peaceful transition of power, which is a foundation of American democracy. And they say that Trump Trump was seeking to hang on to power even though he lost the 2020 election, which was non-fraudulent. Republicans, on the other hand, argue that January 6th wasn't an insurrection. It was just some people who were upset with the way the election went or thought the election was fraudulent protesting, and that they had no intention of overturning the results of the election, or at least very few of them did. They also say it's not as big of a deal as Democrats say it is, that only 200 people made it into the Capitol, and that's mainly a problem with insufficient number of police at the scene. And many say that the election was fraudulent, and even if it wasn't outright voter fraud, that it was informally rigged against Trump through both social and traditional media bias. Alright guys, this has been Mealtime News. Thank you so much for watching. As always, really enjoy making these videos. Enjoy you guys watching them and getting joy out of that. So thank you so much again, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.